Here in Ottawa, the capital region is welcoming clearer air, but in Toronto, people woke up to a third day of high levels of pollution in the air. The city reached a 7 out of 10 on the Air Quality Health Index, the same as yesterday. And meteorologists say that quality will likely remain poor until Sunday or Monday when a new weather system arrives, which should bring rain and winds that push the smoke north. One organization advocating for Canadian firefighters is calling on the federal government to make investments in expanding national firefighting resources, saying this needs to happen now to prepare for future wildfire seasons. They met with federal government officials today about their concerns. Ken McMullen is the president of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs and the fire chief of the Red Deer Fire Department, and he joins me now. Ken McMullen, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Look forward to the opportunity to share with you today.
Well, I wonder if we could start with your conversation with Bill Blair, the Federal Minister of Emergency Preparedness. You spoke with him earlier today to raise concerns about firefighting resources. How did that conversation go?
Yeah, I have to tell you, it went as good as we had planned. I think we have not, for the first time, been in front of the minister today. We have met with the minister in the past. We actually met with him back in December. Today was really an opportunity to bring to light some of the very, very urgent issues that we're facing as the Canadian Fire Service in light of what's happening on the wildfire front.
Well, on that point, I mean, so much of the fight against the wildfires has been done by volunteer firefighters. There's a shortage of training. There's a shortage of equipment. Well, what specific concerns did you highlight with Minister Blair?
There's a few things that we talked to the minister about. And again, I have to tell you, we've had very good response from the minister's office. And there was two things that we really wanted to bring home in the conversation. And you just highlighted both of those. When we talk about incentives and how do we get our volunteers to continue to do what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, currently there's a bit of a tax incentive for volunteers that earn monies in the performance of their duty as a volunteer. Right now, that sits at $3,000 annually. We've asked the minister in the past, and we reminded him again today, to increase that to $10,000 annually to allow volunteer firefighters to have a tax exemption on their monies earned as a volunteer firefighter. The second piece that you referred to was the equipment and training. Up till 2013, the federal government provided a program referred to as the Joint Emergency Preparedness Program, known as JEP. And the JEP funding was a funding opportunity through the federal government that allowed any fire department in Canada to apply for additional special training or equipment. And unfortunately, in 2013, it was intended that we met the intent of the funding, and it ceased to exist after 2013. It didn't take long for us to all recognize how valuable that money was for specialized training, specialized equipment, and we're facing that right now. Our volunteer firefighters in this country have lots of good equipment. They don't necessarily have the equipment that's being required in these wildland-urban interface fires that we're facing today.
Right, so those two things are very connected, right? If you increase the tax exemption compensation, it might increase the number of people who are willing to do it, or it's just a reward for people who take on the hard work of fighting these wildfires. But that training program and equipment upgrading program, that seems like something that needs to be permanent, right? Because you are cycling through people, equipment wears down, equipment gets old, it gets obsolete. Did you get any commitment on whether or not something like that could come back? Because that seems like an obvious thing that the system needs.
I'll tell you, we got some commitments today from the minister, and not necessarily on that particular item, but I'll tell you that the minister was supportive of our continued ask for the tax exemption. So we're very thankful for that. We have talked about the Joint Emergency Preparedness Program, and the minister is certainly willing to have those conversations. I think today's meeting was an opportunity to once again reaffirm our commitment of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs' willingness and desire to work with the government on a whole host of initiatives, tax incentives, emergency preparedness equipment. There's others that I could go on to, David, but I'll just quickly summarize by saying that we've talked about mental health and needing supports for our first responders. And lastly, we've absolutely reiterated our point that Canada needs to have a national fire advisor, similar to our colleagues in the United States under the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency.
But I wonder, Chief McMullen, if some of this is provinces also need to step up, right? I mean, we turn to the federal government when emergencies overwhelmed because they have the most resources. But a lot of these things, emergency management is a provincial responsibility. So, you know, do you need to see more action from that level of government right across the country? It feels like you do.
There's no doubt, and I'll tell you that we do have great cooperation provincially, yet the challenge lies that there are some federal jurisdictions. And as the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs, we represent 3,200 fire departments and 126,000 firefighters in this country. And we hear often, we'll get pushback from our federal counterparts saying, I think that's a provincial issue. And sometimes it is, and other times it's not. And if we take the tax incentive, that is federal. If we look at the JEP funding, that was federal. And when we think about having a national fire advisor and the role that it would play in coordinating each of the province's responses, that's all we believe in the federal jurisdiction.
Right. Well, wildfires don't care about jurisdiction. That's certainly an obvious statement. But I wonder, when you look at what's happening and how hard your members are working right now, can they sustain this level of firefighting? We're only in June. I mean, the real hot months are still to come. So, I mean, where are resources in terms of their capacity to keep going and the need for reinforcements?
Yeah, I'll tell you, the fire chiefs are not often the ones to sound the alarm. But I think what you're hearing us and me say is we've got some concerns. We've got to sound an alarm. The Canadian volunteer system has been around for centuries, and it works most of the time. What it's not designed to do is for prolonged events similar to what we're seeing in Canada. That number I shared with you earlier of 126,000 firefighters in this country, unfortunately, was a reduction of 30,000 firefighters from just 2016. So only 6 years ago, there was 30,000 firefighters more than we have today. You talk about capacity and you talk about sustainability. If that was the trend that we're going to see going forward as a reduction of that significance every 6 to 7 years, we would be having a totally different conversation about how do we protect our country and those that choose to visit us without a volunteer system. Then we'd be in big trouble.
So do you think we can make it through the season then? I mean, I know they'll give every effort, but, the human body can only do so much, and exhaustion sets in, and exposure to smoke is a challenge. I mean, I've seen international firefighters coming in. I mean, where do you think we are in terms of the capacity to hold up?
I'll tell you, the capacity is absolutely on the backs and the shoulders of the men and women tackling these fires every single day. In Alberta, we're on day 37. And I'll tell you, it's wearing on these individuals. It's wearing on myself as a chief in a community that's assisting and watching our partners struggle with these circumstances every day. When you talk about resourcing, and if I use wildland firefighters as an example, that's not uncommon to have Americans, Australians come and assist with the Canadian wildfire season because we reciprocate that in return. It's something that we've done for many years. What is different about this season is the amount of fires that are occurring, the size of those fires, and the jurisdiction for which they're taking place. As soon as Alberta was, quote unquote, being held, the Halifax fires in Nova Scotia occurred.
Right.
And literally the day that we said that those fires were under control, the Quebec wildfire season occurred with great fierce. If you consider all of those components, capacity is an issue. I don't know what we can do today to solve the 2023 fire season, but we know government, and we know it takes time and processes. We have to make our asks today. They have to be real. They have to be realistic and attainable so that we're better prepared for 24, 25 and onward fire season.
So on that, just as a final point, the Prime Minister and members of the government have said there is a discussion happening about creating a national disaster response agency that would deal with this, would deal with floods, would deal with extreme weather events. Is that something you think should happen, or is this a case where we need to beef up the provincial capacity?
We are going on record supporting the creation of a national fire advisor. And I think that there's some tie-ins to this office that you're referring to that we were very pleased to hear about yesterday. We just learned of it yesterday as well. And so we think that there's value in that. I think it's somewhat mirroring our counterparts in the United States with their FEMA model. And within FEMA, there's a position called the U.S. Fire Administrator. We see a very a close alignment with that model here in Canada. So we would fully support the creation of a National Fire Advisor here in Canada.
Okay, Ken McMullen, President of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for all you do. And everybody, please stay safe.